Hey,
Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. How are you all today?
good, thank you.
Yeah, very good to see you. So I welcome you to the fourth Learn to Lead conference. I know some of you have been with me on this journey with the creativity conferences, but this is the fourth leadership conference that I'm running, and several of you have been with me in the leadership conferences for a couple of years now. And the purpose of these conferences is to create a platform where we build bridges through ideas and create synergy and allow a space for emergence of new ideas and new insights. And as we're talking, if I could ask you to raise your hands using the at the bottom of the screen, there's that reactions button, and I just want to make sure that everyone in the room knows to use that, because I will be relying on that feature to call you. So rather than just saying, and what do you think, and going to somebody who's not quite ready with a comment, if you've got your hand raised, it makes it a lot easier for me to call on you next, and you've got something ready that you want to comment on. So if I could please ask you all to just, for the introductions, just to use that raise hand feature, and then I will know who to go to first. Just simply to introduce yourself, say where you are and what your interest is in these United Nations Sustainable Goals. So could you please raise your hand again? I know both of you raised it before, but if everyone could raise their hands, then I will go to you in the order that I see you on my screen. So, Bhavdeep, shall we start with you? Because I know you had your hand raised and then you just lowered it again, and then I'll go to Peter.
I was just showing off, actually. I was just
Yes.
that wasn't a genuine hand raising. It was more, the New Yorker in me. Anyway, good morning. It's 9 a.m. here in New York, and a pleasure to be connected. Just here, thank you very much. My background is I was born in India, but I've lived most of my life in the U.S. Along the way, I've spent about 10-15 years in back in Asia as well. And most of my career has been spent in retail, consumer goods, and healthcare. And probably the most important element of my life is that I'm a father of 2 adult children, and I continue to enjoy that very much. So thank you. Nice to meet everybody.
Okay, wonderful. So could the rest of you please raise your hand again, because it just allows me to check. So I know that both Steve and Peter have figured out where that hands raised button is. But while I'm going to Peter now to talk, if the rest of you could also raise it, it's that button at the bottom of your screen which says reactions. And if you can't see reactions, it will be the 3 dots in parallel. You just click on those 3 dots. So Peter, go ahead, please. If you could just tell everyone who you are, where you are, and what interests you in terms of the sustainable goals.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Griffiths. So I run a company called The Mind Takeaway. I'm actually based in Berlin, in Germany. And actually, a lot of our action and a lot of the things we do for the company are very much aligned to some of these goals. And actually, thank you, Jesper, because I didn't realize how much alignment there was until you actually asked me these questions. So thank you for that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Peter. And Raj Narinder Kaurji, I saw that your hand was raised and then it got lowered again. So I'll go to you next.
Hey, good morning. I believe we're giving background, so I joined a little bit late. So I'm also in New York, born and raised in the States, born in New York, raised in Jersey on the Jersey Shore. I have had my career on Wall Street for over 20 years and just pivoted into academia. And now I'm a business university school professor.
Wonderful. Congratulations on that. And okay, Kulveerji. Go ahead, Kulveer. I think your microphone might be muted.
Hi,
there you go.
I'm Kulveer Singh, and my background is in scientific research, academia, with a master's and a PhD in the field of chemistry. And that has led me to a career based across a number of different
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kulveerji. there seems to be a problem with the microphone, the sound. I can't really make out what you're saying.
Okay.
So if I could come back to you,
Yeah, sure.
maybe you have another microphone, and I'll go to Kathleen.
Hello, my name is Kathleen Dutton. I am a multidisciplinary being. I do design, art, and academia. At the moment, I'm based in London, but I've lived in Hong Kong and for 11 years. And yeah, bridge design and academia and spiritual values. And I'm very interested in the sustainability goals at this time because it aligns with quite a lot of the things that I'm quite passionate about, the environment, Indigenous peoples, Indigenous cultures, but also to do with collaboration, which is key to my own practice. So that's me, and hello.
Okay, wonderful. And okay, let me see. Manjeet ji, could you please introduce yourself and just say where you are for the others and what interests you in the sustainable goals?
All right, my name is Manjeet Panesar. I'm we run a digital company working out on developing applications and websites and mobile apps and so on. We're based in London, Harrow, and our interest in sustainable type of development came about 2016 when we got involved with a consultant who wanted to develop an application that would actually sort of allow organizations to manage and promote sustainable type of projects. So we'll discuss it in a little bit more detail once we actually get into the discussion.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I think that's all. And there is Kamaljeet Kaur ji. Please, could you say hello to everyone? Let them know where you are and what interests you in the goals.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks for having us, and apologies, I was a few minutes late there joining. Yeah, I'm Kamaljeet Kaur. I live in the Midlands. I currently work for a multinational financial institution, involved in lots of things. My day job is involved in financial crime, anti-money laundering. The bank that I work for, it was the chief sponsor of COP26. And I think just naturally I have a good interest in sustainability and, you know, our responsibilities to the environment. And I guess that's what drew me in respect of the goals.
Okay, wonderful. So as I said, my role in this discussion, I aim to be simply a facilitator, simply to be a coordinator. And so it will be really helpful for me to just see the hands raised, because then I don't need to try and fill in the gaps. But let me just start off the conversation by saying that we've just recently had the COP27, and from the perspective of some countries, it went better than expected, and for other countries, it went really badly. So the first question would be, well, whose point of view, whose perspective, whose lens are we looking at these goals under? And what are the inequalities in terms of who has actually said that these 17 goals are more important than other goals? Are there some goals that we've totally overlooked? So who would like to start with their response to that? You know, what are your thoughts on the recent COP27 from your point of view? Did it go well, or did it go badly in your perspective? Manjeet, you have your hand raised, so I'll start with you, Manjeet.
By default. Anyway, yeah, I mean, basically, it all depends as to which perspective you're actually going to look at it from. The countries that are already developed, they'll be looking at it from the point of view that they do not want to give away very much, and the countries who are still developing, they will actually sort of have a bit more interest. They will look at it from the perspective of what impact is the sustainable, the COP27 or 20, I think it was 27, wasn't it? initiative or the findings are actually going to have on their economy and their people. At the end of the day, it's an unjust world. There is no fairness at all. All that happens is that the the richer ones, they actually sort of try to enforce their will on the others. They do not want to give up their little patch, whatever they have conquered so far. And so the ones that are at the bottom of the heap, they actually sort of lose out massively. And it's basically, you know, if everything was just and everything was discussed with actual sustainability, with an actual will to actually resolve the issue of environmental damage, I don't think we would have any problem in coming to a reasonable agreement. So it's the selfishness of certain, you know, developed countries who actually sort of try to skew the whole of the agenda and then blame the ones at the bottom of the heap.
Right. Okay. So you talk about unfairness being pervasive, and unfairness is an example of, like, well, it depends on which point of view, under what lens we're looking at that, because someone living in relative poverty in London is still a lot richer than somebody living in the streets of Delhi, for example. You know, so it's always relative, isn't it? That whole concept of, well, what is fair, what is poverty, and in whose views. So let me go to Kulveer Singh Ji. Go ahead, your comments.
Right. Yes, I just environmental damage, I believe that.
No, that microphone's not working either, Kulveer. There still seems to be a problem with it. Let me go to Kathleen. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. In fact, what is fairness? You know, we can ask ourselves that, and, you know, within our own communities, we will be looking through our own eyes, and we will see that there is a whole spectrum of different ways to exist. And some people we may view as being wealthy, and others we may not. I mean, if I look through the lens of the spiritual values, then the people who actually have financial reward may not actually be the ones who have the sort of happiness, joy perspective. Just because they have those things, they may have, but it's like, to me, this as I'm looking into what it is that actually makes human beings happy and balanced, there are many things, and one of them may also be to do with being able to listen to other people, differences which we may or may not be comfortable with, but we need to listen to them, because, you know, we've had times where maybe our community or our school of thought has been the dominant one, and there will be other times where another school of thought becomes the dominant one. So, you know, it's at this time, one of the things, objective 17 is to be able to work together. Maybe that's it. You know, it actually pulls us to be able to do that. And it's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about how do we actually get to hear different people's voices and actually start to work on things together. And that's where I, yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Kathleen. I think that you've made an important point, because when you talk about listening and hearing people's voices, that's my main kind of rationale for setting up these spaces, is because very often we rely on listening to experts and those who've researched, and they're not very often they're not in touch with grassroots, because I work in academia and I know lots of professors who haven't worked in industry for decades, so they're not really in tune. They know what they know in a very focused way, but they don't know what the ordinary person like yourselves and myself, you know, what is it that we're experiencing at the grassroots level. who would like to comment on that? If I could just see some hands raised, but until I see some more hands raised, let me go back to Gulbir Singh Ji, and let's see if your microphone is working now, Gulbir.
I hope it's working now.
Yes.
Does that sound okay? Okay,
That's
perfect. Yeah, so just based on the two speakers before me, Kathleen and Manjeet, I have to agree. Going back to the environmental damage point, I think there's a real kind of lack of accountability. You know, obviously with the recent Pakistan floods that we've seen that have devastated such a high percentage of the country and the rural areas, and a lot of the business that the country relies on in terms of exports and farming. I think it's good to see on one hand that there's been the creation of the Loss and Damage Fund, which means there's greater accountability to the more developed nations, like Manjeet mentioned earlier, in terms of how they will, because they emit the most kind of emissions, they will then be able to collectively contribute towards the countries who actually see the devastation from those emissions resulting in the climate change disasters, let's say. But I think it's also counterintuitive, because on the other side of that argument is that there's no new emissions reduction commitment in terms of all of the countries coming together to say, do we need to reduce global heating or keep global heating to a certain degree Celsius, etc. And so it's a win, but it's also not so much a win, because then again there's that accountability. You know, going back to the Paris Agreement a number of years back, that's kind of just been tossed out of the window, and I think that's really critical to this, because it's, you know, it will go unanswered now. And just one more point, I think it goes back to also, because there were so many of the countries at COP this year who still rely on fossil fuels, and that's a big hurdle that's yet to be overcome, because even in the UK government, you know, a lot of the kind of the parliamentary people in cabinet have vested interests in the fossil fuel industry. And so it comes down to, how do we lobby to make those changes, or at least to raise that awareness in our own kind of national institutes, to then ladder it up into those big decisions that are made at COP or, you know, at the UN, etc. So I think, like I said, there's some improvements. Obviously, there'll always be improvements due to the kind of widespread action and raising awareness, but there's also kind of things that we need to still agree on and still move forward on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Gulbir Singh. And so what you're saying, it reminds me of like the fact that some countries, there's a more significant proportion of people in those countries who are victims of these inequalities and the impact of climate change, and there are others who are more active in terms of what they're trying to do to counteract it. And so there's that cycle between poverty and wealth. You know, when we are in a state of poverty, we attempt to become more wealthy, and as we become more wealthy, we become more wasteful. You know, it's like a lot of people here in England with the fuel prices, a lot of people are still wasting because they can afford to waste. They're still kind of, they have their central heating on and they have their windows open because they're not really fussed about how much it's going to cost. Whereas those who are in more poverty, they know they can't afford to keep their windows open when, you know, the bills are going to be so high. So there's that, you know, there's that dilemma. It's like, well, we take people out of poverty, or we become like, we raise ourselves out of poverty and then we become more wasteful.
Yeah, if I can just add a very quick point actually to that, and this connects a little to one of the areas of interest that's really kind of that I'm passionate about in terms of water sanitation rather, and it goes to that point around, you know, the wealthy get to a position where they become wasteful, because, you know, when it comes to clean water, decent toilets, sanitation, the UN predicts that demand for water will outstrip supply by 40% in 10 years' time. But what's really interesting is that over 2/3 of all free water resources in the world currently are actually being used or taken, let's say, by the big conglomerates and the production of ingredients and the corporate supply chains. And so if, when it comes to wastefulness, I think there needs to be a bit more of a program put in place to help reduce at least the consumption of those resources, in this case the water, to then be able to distribute it a little bit more equally to, like you mentioned, the lesser developed countries, or the poorer regions. And I think that's probably a big miss in the COP as well. But obviously it's part of the 17 sustainability goals, and it needs to be.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Let me go to Bhavdeep Singh Ji. Then Kathleen, I'll come to you after Bhavdeep Singh.
Sure. I just, I want to step back for a second. I very often when I think about what I read in the paper, what I hear in the news, what I read on the net, one of the things that I've realized over a period of time is that when I was first started working in my company, and the corporate ladder, as it were, I always had an assumption that the level above me knew what they were doing, right? I knew less, they knew more. And it was interesting because my assumption was that when I got to the to the top of the house, that this was the all knowledgeable, complete, the expertise, the level of understanding, clarity. I mean, it was just about a couple of notches below God, right? I mean, a young business person looking to grow. The CEO was, you go a couple of level higher, that's about the highest you can go. So I always made the assumption that the people above me knew what they were doing. And as I've worked in different places in the world, I've come to realize that that's not always the case. It's not always the case. I went from in one of my roles, I went to this huge organization, $30 billion company. And I thought to myself, good Lord, very successful brand, very successful new, great brand name, etc. And I thought to myself, this is going to be great. I'm working with this huge organization. These guys have it figured out. They were a mess. They were a mess, just like just about any place else you go. And the reason I guess I'm sharing this perspective, and I have a question that I'm actually posing, is that what I struggle with is the facts and the assessment of the situation around sustainability that we've all come to believe or understand based on who's saying it. So in the US, if you watch Fox or CNN and you hear the topic of sustainability, it's not even living in two different countries. It's like you're living in two different planets, right? So you can actually have somebody watching CNN and walk away thinking, good Lord, lock the hatchets, go buy beans and rice. We're screwed, right? We're screwed. If you watch Fox, you think, these people are crazy. The world is fine. We have nothing to worry about. And so what I struggle with is, the discussion, the conversation we're having is I think so much of what has to be done around sustainability is about ground roots, effort, and what you can do locally, what you can do in your community, what you can do to build awareness. Where do you think you can add value? Because I struggle with the facts as I read them and as I understand them. The position in the United States on sustainability has actually gone like this, depending on who's in the office, right? Who's running the country. Look at what's happening in India now, right? I mean, we have several of us from Indian descent. There's a big shift going on there. But again, it's a function of who you listen to. So I'm curious as to, because I struggle with, what are the facts around this? What are the details around this? I struggle with the fact that even people who come out with the biggest noise and the loudest jakaras, the biggest soapbox about how big a problem it is, very often you find out that there's an agenda there. There's an agenda. I've been chairman of a charity foundation, and I inherited the role in one of my companies, and I found out there was an agenda that was very much driven by business. It was very much driven by business. It had nothing. I shouldn't say it had nothing. A byproduct was that we managed to do a couple of good things along the way, but make no mistake about it, this was a business agenda. So I'm curious as to how we think about the facts that we read. If you Google sustainability fact check, 10 million search items come up, right? Just in terms of the information that's so I'm just curious as to how we think about it, because when I think about sustainability, when I think about, whether it's waste, whether it's recycling, what I can do, I struggle getting past that. I struggle getting past and trying to understand what are the real facts around this, what are the actual steps we can take. And if you think about electric vehicles, EVs is this huge topic here in the US, and I'm not sure what it's like in other parts of the world, but the whole idea, you have the Biden administration pushing EVs, then you have this whole school of thought around the fact we're not going to have enough electrical power to be able to power all these EVs if they actually come out. So I'm curious as to how we think about what we read, what we hear from the experts who, when I was growing up, I thought they knew everything. They don't. I'm curious as to how we think about that as a group, and what does that mean in terms of tangible action steps that we can take that actually start to shift not just the ground reality, but the discourse and dialogue that we're having.
Thank you very much, Bhavdeep Singh Ji. I just need to comment on what you've just said, because there's different sources of knowledge, and there's that source of knowledge that is based on our own lived experience. There's the first person knowledge, and then there's the second person, which is you and I, like through our discussions, what is it that we believe, what is it that we're co-creating. There's that knowledge, and then there's the third person knowledge, which is the experts, what society says, what others say, what he, she, that expert and that specialist say. And when I'm teaching, I always ask my students to not simply rely on that third person knowledge that they read about in the textbooks and the documentations that they have to read for their course. They have to think about, well, how does that relate to my own lived experience? And the reason I create these spaces, these conferences, this is because we're relying on that second person knowledge. What do we think about it? What's your experience? What's my experience? And how do we make sense of that? So go ahead, Kathleen.
Okay, I was quite excited by the knowledge moment as well. So you talked about that, what kind of knowledge? I mean, and there's spiritual knowledge, there's higher knowledge, as well as the knowledge of technically how to put things together, as well as first person knowledge, observed, etc., and all the different ways. I mean, so knowledge is something that is multifaceted, really, and it's good to actually know where we're coming from, to sort of be able to pin down some of these sort of objectives. And one of the things I've given some thought to, really, is the idea of because I was a designer before, but I was an academic artist. I've done sort of bridged different worlds, and the design company I worked with was multidisciplinary. So we had architecture, interiors, product, corporate packaging, and retail. Yeah, so bridged all of those things. So in some ways, we would have a design brief. So I like the idea of almost a design brief or a manifesto, a bit like something like the Bauhaus. If you have an objective, a bit like also the other gentleman before was talking about, charities, they can have another agenda, that can be other things. But if you have a sort of a manifesto, and you do have your objectives, and what are your objectives? They can be to sort of describe or bring together groups of knowledge. I mean, one of the things that I knew when I was working at a design company was that I did not know anything apart from my own skill set. It was only when we worked together that we would, be able to create the design for a shop. But I didn't know how to do the architecture. I didn't know how to do the product. I didn't know how to do a lot of the different things. So it was like an open kind of dialogue and conversation where you're listening, writing things down, learning from each other, and you actually all have to go away and do your own homework a little bit, because it's not like any one person holds the knowledge. It's like something that your objective is allowing you to work together. And I feel like that's kind of the thing that is required now. So we're talking about something to do with living through our values. talk about how we want our world to be in the future, so that the next generations live with all of these things that we would like them to have. Clean water, air. I mean, these are not ridiculous things, and we have the ability to do it. The thing is, if everyone tries to do it on their own, or, you know, individual countries, and this separation, it's not going to really be able to happen. But if we actually come together, sort of a design, I almost feel like it needs a design brief, a manifesto to do creative work. There needs to be a holder. So that's you know, so which includes some design thinking, lots of different layers of information and knowledge coming together.
Yeah, and when you talk about air, clean air and clean water, where are the boundaries? You know,
Yeah,
clouds,
exactly.
clouds, they move, you know, without boundaries. But let me go to Rajnarind Kaurji. Go ahead, Rajnarind.
Yeah, so I think my thoughts on this are we tend to, I guess, not really understand the impact of one person. One person can have a huge impact. Where I am, just if you kind of work together, you can have the impact locally, you can have the impact globally. And I've seen it. I've seen it on Wall Street, where one person has an idea to go to Africa and help with the water, help with the infrastructure. Here at the universities, if we have an idea from a sustainability, we can create a project, we have the funding. If you pitch it, if you do it from a business perspective and you do it properly, you can get the individuals who you need, to what Kathleen was saying, kind of play to everyone's strengths. You may not know how to do everything, but if you can gather and rally up a group of individuals, you can have a huge impact. Here in New Jersey, and just where you and I have spoken about this before, but we were able to, in one day, in 5 hours, raise, I think we made 150,000 meals. It's called the New Jersey Hunger Project. And we deliver that all throughout New Jersey. We even set aside some for Ukraine. I'm on the board of that nonprofit. I'm on another board where we raised $40,000 in just 2 months. And we were able to kind of distribute that locally to over 7 charities. So I think that if there is a cause that you feel passionate about, you as an individual can do so much, and have that power, rather than kind of relying on those individuals who supposedly know what they're doing, or waiting on, you know, the organized kind of directive from someone else. You can do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I feel empowered enough to do that. You can have that impact, you can make that difference, and you'll have everyone behind you.
Yeah, and that spur to action comes from that empathy, that love, that compassion, or sometimes through anger as well. Sometimes people can feel a great deal of anger, and that spurs them to action. Kamaljeet Kaur, I know you've been waiting for a while. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I guess it's really building on what Rajnarind and Benji just said there, and what Bobdeep just said there around, you know, what can we do, and what information or knowledge do you really trust? It's almost like if you just strip it back to how you live and do some self-reflection and think about, I guess, the level of plastic waste you might have after you've done your weekly food shop. And it's, you know, our waste is collected every week or every 2 weeks, and it's out of sight, out of mind. But where is it going to? And if we needed to become self-sufficient in how we live, then we will begin to realize, gosh, look at this plastic consumption that I've got. What can I do with it? Or how am I going to get rid of it? And I think even just really stripping it back to being self-sufficient and trying to do your bit in that respect, I think that is enough self-realization to know, you know, take away the knowledge and or the experts that actually the way that we're living currently isn't sustainable, you know, for the planet, and we need to take action. And I guess that, you know, links into some of those goals around reduced inequalities, as well as, you know, sustainable living across the community. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've spoken about this whole concept of recycling before, and the fact that we can be recycling, but it gets dumped in poorer countries, and So we're just taking a problem away from one area and dumping it in another area and creating a bigger problem over there. And there's this whole thing about the circular economy, so that instead of waiting to put our plastic bottles in the recycling bin where, you know, they're just going to create a problem elsewhere, the circular economy is about actually reusing these things and thinking about all the different points where something can be reused and reinvented before, you know, sending it off to the waste. Kulveer Singh ji, go ahead, please.
Thanks. I think I wanted to just relate it back to a couple of the points that Kathleen made around the need for knowledge and the value of design thinking and putting together a design brief. I think that's super important, because, you know, it's that allows people to reflect on how they think and the cognitive action behind how they think, in terms of, okay, why did I make that decision? What drove me to make that decision? And then put together a brief of sorts. You know, I worked in an agency as well, a creative agency, so I'm very familiar with that. It put together a brief and an action plan of sorts that brings people together. But I think the real key is that need for knowledge, because like a couple of the panelists have mentioned, it's whether you trust it and where it comes from, and it's those lived experiences. So, you know, just doing a bit of research before this call, there's something that came up in terms of climate action in African countries, where one of the big issues is that the youth groups who are on the ground experiencing the droughts, experiencing the poor energy structures that are available in their townships and their villages, actually are so disassociated with the think tanks who then make the decisions for that country or that system, that it's just like you know, the blind leading the blind, effectively. And I think it's that connection that maybe we need to start to develop and strengthen. You know, I think it goes back to I think what Rajna and Benji said, in terms of it's one person's impact, then it becomes a group's impact. But then once you've mobilized the people and empowered them, how can we then use that mobilization, that raw energy of action to facilitate decisions at the top? And I guess that goes back to Bhavdeep's positions or suppositions at the start, where it's about how do we, convert that knowledge into some form of action, perhaps. And it's a great conversation to have, but it's the connection points that we, in my mind, we need to identify and then empower to make the changes and make the connections that result in, COP happening and these decisions happening for the greater good.
Thank you very much, Kulveer Singh ji. And I also agree with you both, Rajendra and yourself, about the impact that one individual can have, but it has to be the right time and the right place. And to give an example of what I mean, that an individual can have a very profound impact depending on where they're at and when they do what they do, is the recent example of what happened in the Royal Palace a few days back, when the lady who was born in London, but she was continuously asked, where are you from? Where are you really from? And we've been asked those questions and made to feel as though we don't belong for decades. And we've been complaining about it. We've been putting it on social media, but none of it had that turnaround impact until this person just actually, because the conversation was witnessed by two others, and she put it on Twitter, and it created an international kind of uproar about it. And I think people will now think twice before they ask somebody where they really come from, simply because they don't happen to look like the race they expect to be associated with. So you see, so it's the power of one individual putting a message out on Twitter, but it had to be in the right place at the right time. So those of you who are not from England, I'm sure you must have heard that news because it's been traveling all around. But Manjeet Manjeet Singh, what are your comments on what maybe something I said or what the previous speakers have said?
I think it's just summarizing whatever has been discussed so far. I don't know whether you've actually sort of heard the phrase "small is beautiful." What we are trying to do, or what the world is trying to do, is trying to actually attack everything at the same time, and try to attack it in the way that certain powerful people think that it should be done with. What you should really be pushing for is passing the control on to the people who are affected and impacted, and supporting them, and actually sort of empowering them for their own, because they have got their own solutions. If you remember the recent elections in Brazil, when the incumbent president was being challenged by Mr. Lula, and basically what he, the local people who are within the Amazon forest, who are being impacted and who are actually sort of losing their livelihoods and stuff like that, they said it to the world. They said, don't interfere with our territory. We will sort it out the way we want to, because we know it better than anybody else. So this exactly goes into the ethos of the problem that, in a small way, that we are trying to tackle. But the other issue that everybody is forgetting here, which is a very important issue, is that there is a lot of political will that does not allow certain to even start to take off. You can have the best will in the world, you can have all the money in the world, you can throw it at the issue. If the political powers in that area or that country or that continent are not going to allow this thing to happen, you can do whatever you want, it won't happen.
Yes.
Consequently,
yeah, go ahead.
Consequently, it actually hurts the people. Okay. Now, I have always believed, I've actually sort of said this, that there is a lot of good that is being done by the charities and other voluntary groups like Khalsa Aid, and we have SWAT in the UK. I'm sure there are plenty in America doing a lot of good work. There are two things that actually concern me every time I actually sort of listen to this thing. One is that we do everything. In other words, at the time when, during the pandemic, I think the Sikh Gurdwaras around the world, they actually fed millions of people. But because of our kind of, the ethos or something, that whatever we do not sing about it. And we do not actually sort of go and raise our flags and saying, hey, come along, have a look. We actually sort of did this. We have actually fed 5,000 people a day, etc. It actually hurts us in the sense that we do it and then we are still trodden on. That's one thing. The other thing that also happens is that politically, we are not actually pushing our youngsters to get into politics. Now, I applaud people from Canada. Anybody here from Canada? No? Okay. I applaud for the people from Canada, because the very first thing that they did was to actually get involved in the local government. They got involved with the councillors, and then slowly they started moving up, and now they're in the parliament. How many people in the UK are in parliament who are Sikhs? Only one or two, actually, because we've got Preet Kaur Gill and Tanmanjeet Singh. In America, we do have people who are actually sort of in power at the lower ranks, which is good, but not that many as what we need. And those are the kind of things that actually go out and influence ideas. They go and influence your communities and try to build a better kind of communication with the powers to be, alongside all these discussions that we are having about the environment and all these kind of things. What we need to do is we need to get involved, and we have to be astute, and we have to be there in front, in the face of people politically.
Thank you very much, Manjeet Singh ji. And Peter, I'm conscious that your hand's not raised, so I'll come back to you, but I'll go to Bhavdeep Singh because his hand is raised. Go ahead.
Sure. You know, as I'm listening to all the comments, and you know, Manjeet Singh ji just talked about the fact that recognizing where's the source of not just power but resources, right? To move anything forward, you have to have the resources. And I think that one of the other things that when we talk about sustainability, and it's very interesting, again, going back to corporate environment, we had a charitable foundation, and it was very interesting to note that when we had good financial quarters, we always had our charitable foundation meeting. When the results weren't so good, we didn't have time. We didn't have time because we were worried about the bottom line. We were worried about the P&L. And I find it interesting that because I think that when you think about sustainability and recognizing that there's so many different things, it's such a huge area that can be covered and gets talked about and gets referenced, and how people define it. Really starting to understand, you know, what are the vital few versus the important many, because there are probably 50 important things that we could be doing, but you know, ground reality is one of the reasons that the last 10, 15 years that we've heard so much talk about sustainability, so much talk about, you know, apart from the fact that research and studies have started to indicate some clear trends and patterns, but research studies get funded, right? They get funded as well, and they get funded in good times, right? I mean, think about if you were able to quantify headlines and news stories about sustainability in the last 2 years versus the prior 2 years, you'd see a massive reduction because the world was worried about COVID, right? And now the economic environment in the world. So if you think about where we are right now, to think, because and it was in this period of, you know, the boom times, you know, between that 2008, you know, after the Lehman crisis, 2008, 2009 to 2018, 19, in the good times, and Raj worked on Wall Street, and she lived through that as well. That's when the awareness level built. That's when these studies got funded. That's when companies started doing so much more work in this space. But I can assure you, and you all know this as well, you're all, you know, familiar with, understand how the world works, that, you know, whether it's COVID, whether it's the economic challenges that we're having right now, whether it's inflation, the various things that are going on, very quickly we're going to start to see funding dry up. Very quickly we're going to start to see a less focus on these things. So I think if to have this conversation and to make it a meaningful conversation, it really starts to become, so what's the focus, right? What are the vital few? What are the 2-3 things that matter most versus everything from emission to waste to recycle? I mean, because there's so many things. If you go to India right now, you'd be, and I've lived in India, you know, about 12 out of the last 15, 18 years I've lived in India. You'd be surprised at how much talk there is about sustainability in Punjab. But that has a great deal to do with the economic environment there, right? I mean, you know, when somebody's worried about their next meal or how they're going to get their children married or fund an education, nobody's talking about sustainability, I can assure you. So I think there's something to be said for, you know, what's the sustainable approach to sustainability, right? Versus the call of the hour or call of the day, whatever it might be, number one. Number two, by virtue of that, what do we define as the 2 or 3 things that matter? And, you know, we've all said this independently now in the last 5 minutes that, you know, what can people do as an individual, right? I mean, somebody said, you know, what do you think one person can do? Everything, right? And we've all said that. So I think that even for the purpose of this conversation, you know, apart from having a nice discussion conversation and, you know, we all get connected on LinkedIn, that's all good and well. And an hour later, you know, we're out having a Big Mac. There's something to be said for what's the sustainable approach to even this conversation? What are the tangible things we can do? And there's an element here because there's a Sikh community element, is what can we do as a community? You know, Manjeet Singh ji, you talked about the fact that, you know, Sikhs, the Sikh community who are establishing themselves in different, you know, political environment. Well, I can tell you that a new politician, a Sikh politician, any minority, any ethnicity, they have to think about what's the issue that matters the most to the most people, so that continues to propel them in terms of what they're doing. So I guess the net of what I'm saying is narrow the focus. Let's think about what's sustainable, because in some, and the where we land should be something that's going to carry us through good times, bad times, and 5 years from now we're able to have the same conversation, not say, what do we do now?
Thank you very much, Bhavdeep Singh ji. And when you were talking about sources of information, like what information do you trust? Do you trust the news put out through, they say it will be researched, Fox News or CNN News, you know, both of them will say we have researched these stories, and it's the same in academia. We have to think about who is actually funding the research. For example, diabetes. We know that diabetes can be managed without drugs, but there isn't very much research that goes into that. And so when you go to your doctor, the doctor will prescribe metformin because metformin has been researched, and the alternative ways of, you know, the non-drug ways of managing the diabetes have not been researched. Same with cholesterol levels. The doctor will say take statins because there's not enough research to say what else can you do apart from taking statins, which will have side effects. And so in terms of who is funding the research, I am in academia, and I know that research into areas, for example, inequalities and outcomes and all of that, there isn't the funding for that. There's funding for things which have a tangible kind of economic overt kind of benefit, but the kind of things that really would enhance the quality of education for a diverse number of people, there isn't funding for that. So let me see. Peter, I'm conscious of the fact that I haven't spoken to you for a while, but you haven't got your hand raised. So let me just give you the opportunity to say something. There you go. Yeah, I can see that you're still...
I'm just enjoying the conversation, but yeah. Thanks for checking in. No, I mean, from my side of things, I mean, I work with CEOs and senior leaders. So my job is simply to get people curious about these issues that are, you know, sometimes simple to resolve, but quite often complex. And to all of your point, you know, it requires community, individual action. So I'll pick climate change as one big example. There's so much in the media about how it's an individual's problem, and that just simply isn't true. I mean, I'm an activist myself. I do my bit. I don't have a car. I don't preach about it, but, you know, I do everything I can as an individual, as a company, even though I'm a small company. But the issue with climate action right now is the fact that it's pushed onto individuals, whereas heavy industry and whole countries, and I know we talked about it earlier in the conversation, they do very little. And again, I know it's not popular, but the richer countries have to do more. I'll give an example. So today, I don't know if you noticed on the news that the US just bought a load of bombers. They just you know, they literally wheeled out their new nuclear bombers. And if you look at how much money, I mean, I think I wrote some of the facts about it down now. It's about 750 million to build it, and they've just ordered 110, and they're complaining that they can't give enough money to India and developing countries to do more for climate. Come on. So I know we've talked about it. It is really challenging when you look at all of the facts and figures, and if you look at main media, I can understand why individuals would say that they're overwhelmed. How the hell do you fact check and the like? But quite often when I work with senior leaders, they're just not curious enough, if I'm honest. You know, they're not looking to see what they can do on an individual level. They're not looking what they can do in their community. And if I'm honest, in the West, we're all too comfortable. I think that's the main challenge, and me included. You know, I know that I could probably do more as an individual, and I know that as a company, for me individually, it's a work in motion. Every day is a different learning. I'm pretty sure that, you know, when I look at all of these things, we could all do more. So I guess that's the biggest challenge that I see in the more comfortable nations, that there's just a lack of curiosity about what can really be done, what could really have the most impact, considering that resources are becoming really scarce.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I like the fact that you describe yourself as an activist, and in contrast to being an activist, for me, it's like being a victim. And we can be victims or we can be activists, and we can be both. And coming from a coaching background, I know that in the coaching industry, it's kind of like frowned upon to be a victim, to be negative, to have that victim mentality. But in my view, it's important to see ourselves as both victim and activist, because it's from that position of being, well, I'm a victim of this, that do we feel that anger, that pain, that empathy, and all of that, you know, all of those emotions that spur us on into taking action. You know, so Kathleen, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know you're interested as well.
I am interested in that. I mean, I've been part of a number of projects. I find myself in the role of being catalyst, and sometimes that means me being a victim and then making the move into activism. But for me, like, the big sort of overriding things is to do with the idea that we are all souls and everyone needs to give everybody equal respect. We're not our physical shells. And you can actually have like a society where people are not valuing each other on the external. I mean, to me, this is part of the world that I would like to see in this world. And sustainability, we talk about sustainability, but what are we actually sustaining? Do we actually want to sustain more of this world? Sustain. What does sustain mean? I mean, we have to sit with that. We actually don't want more of this. We don't want to sustain this. What are we trying to sustain? The earth, maybe in her original state, and maybe, you know, humanity in its best possible, but certainly the, you know, production methods, etc., that we have now, you know, not everywhere in the world, but that have been dominating, have not led us on a good path. So, you know, and to me, the creative self, maybe the best metaphor, which I just came up with a minute ago, might be a bit crazy, but it's something like the Starship Enterprise. You know, everyone's seen Star Trek, and on Star Trek, there is a group of people, they're all experts, they're all different, they come from all different parts of not just the world, but also other galaxies. And, you know, and people bringing all this amazing knowledge. Yes, there is a place where it comes together and they go from place to place and they actually share their knowledge. But there is also a code of conduct and there is an objective. And to me, that's so for anything to happen. Yes, we have to go from the role of being, you know, the victim into sort of action. Then maybe we become a catalyst for ourselves, then maybe a catalyst for others. And yeah, I like the idea of a Star Trek Enterprise of environmental souls actually making a change.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Kathleen. And Manjeet Singh and Kulveer Singh, I see you both have hands raised, so we will just take a couple of minutes each for you both just to make your final comments. Then go ahead, Manjeet Singh ji. You're on mute, Manjeet Singh. Let's go to Kulveer Singh. You're both on mute, actually, so you will need to, yeah, there you go, Kulveer Singh.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll quickly go ahead then. I think that was an incredible insight, actually, Kathleen, because that question itself, what is it to sustain? Because I mean, when we look at it, I guess sustainability is typically dominated by facts and figures in terms of where we were versus where we are, and so it's always a case that we're trying to get back to where we were, but because it's dominated by facts and figures, it's just you know, it's transient, and realistically, you know, if we go back to where we were 2 years ago in terms of percentage of emissions per capita, per country, you know, per continent, I mean, we could still go further back and further and back and further and back and get better and better, is what we're trying to say. And so that raises a bit of an existential crisis, really, in terms of like, where are we actually heading rather than what we're trying to get back to. And I think that, like you alluded to, is very much the trickier question. Like, are there a set of parameters that we, you know, as a working group or as a think tank, that we'd like to envisage us to be able to hit as targets, and whether that's percentages of XYZ or whether that's state of mind, because I think that's probably what again, something that you were alluding to in terms of the creative self, the creative person, you know, our original selves, etc. And so that's, I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but it's a really unique way of thinking. And then I guess it goes back to just very quickly in terms of what Peter mentioned. It's it also addresses how we're just not quite the leaders in the companies have to be more accountable. They're not really aware of what they should be accountable for. And I think a lot of the time, especially after COP, is there's this element of greenwashing where just for the sake of coming across as being environmentally friendly and climate orientated, they'll crack out some initiatives that might make a bit of a change. And I think maybe that's the broader brushstroke that we need to address, because like in my mind, the only way we can really bring about actual change that will then filter up into those echelons of the companies, etc., is if we start from, it's been mentioned, we start from us. Because I think, Komaljit Benji mentioned, it's that self-reflection of our values. The solution is often born from the problem that you reflect on and you take action on. So, for example, if I need some milk, I will run to the shop and get it, versus walking, versus taking the car, versus on my cycle, right? And so it's those plethora of different options that are then brought into reality by me, and then someone else might take that on board and do that. And it's that concertina effect, right, that we want to try and roll out a bit more kind of broadly. I know I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but that was just my input there.
Wonderful.
I like
Thank
that.
you. So let me just go to Rajnarind Kaur, and then we'll finish off with Komaljit Kaur if that's okay, because it's just hit 3 o'clock. So Rajnarind, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think one of the things that I wanted to address was Manjit Vijay, the CKRC, that I guess that SIX kind of do with not pounding the drum and all. I think that's just who we are. It does get recognized, and I think when we selflessly serve and do seva with our heart, I know here we were able to present to the UN at the parliamentary documentary all about the seva that the SIX did. And we raised the level of awareness of not only langar seva, but also cremation seva and oxygen seva. So there are many opportunities that the SIX are highlighted and are recognized for their efforts. And then the other thing that I wanted to say, I think, was just to kind of end, is that what I teach my students and what the students have is that fresh perspective, to really think out of the box and to kind of make those in power a little bit more understanding of what they can do. So the CSR aspect of all the corporations, the corporate social responsibility, is there, and it's embedded, and everybody kind of is behind it. But when a fresh perspective is brought in and focused on some of these 17 sustainable goals, so much can happen. There's so many companies right now that my students brought to my attention that are making products out of the recycled plastic. And to think that and go behind that and work towards work with a company that actually kind of mirrors your values, you can do so much. You will be empowered. And again, I just keep going back to you as one person can have a huge difference. And that voice will be behind you as you kind of do a business pitch. As you pitch yourself, you spin your story and you kind of rally those around you. You can really make that difference with the companies and change their thinking and do a lot more than what I feel like we are kind of saying. Even a child, like my children were able to present at the sustainable conference at my university. And the ideas that they had were recognized.
Yeah.
And to bring that forward, it doesn't matter which age or whatnot, it's just bringing those ideas forward.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Now, Manjit Singh, you still have your hand raised, and I just wanted to finish off very quickly with Komaljit Kaur and Kulveer Singh if we have time, but we'll probably go on a few more minutes after the hour if that's okay with everyone. So just a quick word, Manjit, just to round off.
Yeah, I mean, basically, what there are where sustainable elements also start with poverty and things like that, and basically what we have been talking about is things that are way high above the ordinary man in the street, the person who in Africa somewhere is actually in a drought-beaten place and things like that. That what sort of things are we, or what sort of things the world is trying to do in order to support those individuals. Now, your last, I was just watching the live cast of your first discussion, and one of the gentlemen, he actually said, I think Sarvajit Singh, he actually made a very, 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 very pointed comment that you go there and you throw money at the situation. That's not the end of it, because at the end of the day, that money is actually going to be squandered and just distributed within minutes. What's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen the day after? And that is the sustainable element that we are trying to, or we are building in the project that we are working on, so that you actually give them the money once, but then afterwards it actually so that they are able to turn themselves and then look after themselves, and then you carry on to the next group and so on and so forth. So that's something we have been talking at a very high level, I thought, but it's the ordinary person at the end of the day that we have to focus on as well.
That's right. And that's you and I, and that's people like Peter saying, I'm not, I don't drive a car because I want, we're all doing our bit. I'm a vegetarian, most of us here are vegetarians. And so we all do our own little bit, but that's me talking too much. Bhavdeep Singh Ji, go ahead. You have your hand raised, Bhavdeep Singh. So I just thought, do you have a final comment to make? I'm sorry, Bhavdeep Singh, I can't hear you. So Kamaljeet Kaur, do you want to, because I'm conscious I haven't heard from you for a while, do you want to just quickly say something to end up?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's been great to hear everyone's different perspectives, and I just think, upon reflection, there's the interconnectedness between us all, between everything, we consume, we use, who we are as individuals. Yeah, I think it was just a great opportunity to share thoughts and lived experiences, and also take the time to reflect on, for me, for sure, what I can do to help to preserve the planet, think about sustainability and what individual choices we can all make, because it all links in with one another in the communities, that be spiritual or, or whatever, I guess keeps you grounded and centered. But yeah, thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, well, thank you all very much. So, Bhavdeep Singh Ji, I think you froze for a while. That's why we couldn't hear you. And Gulveer Singh, I know I'm conscious that you didn't have a chance to introduce yourself at the beginning, but we have access to each other's LinkedIn profiles. When I send out that program later on today, you'll be able to click on it and see the recordings of the other live panel discussions, including everyone else who is on here as well in their LinkedIn profile. So hopefully that will be a way for you all to interconnect with each other and to continue these conversations that we started. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.